for coming. And before I start on the substance, I just, again, one more time, want to acknowledge the amazing team of Art d'Egypte, Nadine Abdel-Ghaffar, who's with us, Hanya, Hannah, Mito, everybody, because it really is a groundbreaking historic event, and you guys have worked so hard, and I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. I so appreciate everything you've done. So a round of applause for them. And also I want to acknowledge the ambassador. Thank you for being here. It means so much to me, your support. So again, I'm honored to be here, and now we'll dig into the substance. So my lecture today is going to be kind of two aspects of my work, which is the making of the work, because a lot of people are interested in the process, and then also how does that making become meaning? So what does it mean? And I hope I live up to Simon's wonderful description of my work. So I want to start with the concept of the word transmutation, because transmutation is really the process of transforming a rudimentary material, like in this case the ancient Egyptians used stone, limestone, granite, and they transformed material into something that became meaningful and had mystery and magic and had meaning way beyond the substance itself. And so that's what artists do today, and they've always done historically, is add meaning to materials that otherwise would just maybe not be anything or just be matter. And I'm going to basically cover the process of how we made the gold dome, Eternity Now, and how I take the elemental material of carbon fiber and transmute it into a sculpture with meaning beyond itself. So first, I dreamed up the sculpture based on the location of the pyramids and the context. And the first step we do is we basically make it into a three-dimensional drawing on the computer and show the different structures and layers. Then we design an internal structure that's going to support the carbon fiber. And this internal structure is made of wood and steel, and here you can see it on the computer. And then this structure gets perfected with attachment points into the carbon fiber shell. And then we create a mold. And the mold production is a process with a CNC machine that drills into industrial foam blocks. And this takes several days, maybe even a week of this machine working to create this shape, and it has to be perfect. Then the mold gets coated in another softer material that's going to receive the carbon fiber. And then that second iteration goes back to the CNC machine for another routing process that takes days. And here I'll just play a very short clip so you can see how this machine works. So this is a very slow and precise process, as you can see, and it goes on for days and days. And that little machine goes back and forth until the mold is absolutely perfect and flawless. And then we begin the carbon fiber layup process. And so it's many, many different layers cross-hatched, one on top of the other, in opposite diagonal directions, because carbon fiber is really like this soft fabric like you see there. And what's incredible is it's basically created by blasting extreme heat into carbon and taking out all the molecules, and all that's left is just pure carbon, and it's really soft and silky. So it's incredible how you can take a fabric like this, that's almost like, feels like silk, and you can cross-hatch it in many different layers, and it becomes so strong that they use it for aircraft, rockets, airplanes, because it's thin and lightweight, but it's really, really strong. And so the process, this is them doing the carbon fiber layup. And you can see the mold kind of in that stage of different layerings. Here, did I jump forward here? Okay, here is once the carbon fiber form is pulled out of the mold. There you see one portion, one half of it, because I make it in two halves. And then, in the meantime, while we're doing the carbon fiber layup, a separate team is basically creating the internal structure of steel and wood that's going to go inside of it to support the carbon fiber. And here they're laying it into, preparing it to join the two halves. Here's the second half coming on top, so it's going to be joined together, and then it gets heat fused. Oh, here's the bottom of the sculpture in case you're interested. So it's basically wood, and then we put an aluminum plate all over the bottom, but we do have these two manholes just in case we ever have to go inside the sculpture for some reason. Right? We don't like crawl in there. But so then the two halves get fused together perfectly, so there's like no seams. So you know, it just becomes completely like a perfect surface. And then it goes into finishing. And here are my amazing team of finishers, and they do basically sanding and sanding and sanding until it's just like really smooth. And we put this black, kind of coated in this black powder just so they can keep track of like what areas they've sanded and then make sure they go over it a few times. Here it is almost finished in the final sanding and finishing. And in the meantime, this is a small little prototype I do to test the color. So I worked really hard to get this special gold pigment that I developed that could have all the range of golds, which we'll see later in the sculpture. And so here it is, now the color's been applied, all the gold pigment, and now they're basically buffing and polishing the sculpture till it becomes reflective. I'm doing a quality check there to make sure everything's seamless. And then we wheel it out into the sun to make sure that in the sun the color, the pigment is activated the way that I want it to become activated. And here we get the glow, and as soon as we get that marvelous glow, then I know we're done. And then meanwhile, we're designing the crating system, which is made out of steel and wood, to hold the baby. And then it gets put into, here's the process of crating it. It's building the crate around it and then covering it in the soft fabric so it can travel all the way to Cairo. And this is my incredible team. This is just the core people, but this is a company of like over 100-something employees that has built this. All different departments that work on it. And I have to say, this is really special to me because the owner of the company, Javier Valdivieso, is from Ecuador. He's in the center of the picture there, and he came here to the pyramids with his wife. Javier and his entire team are from Latin America, and so I'm from Puerto Rico. I mean, there's people from Peru, Mexico, El Salvador, everywhere. So I feel like my work, and they feel like they're represented in the work here at the pyramid. So my work, in a sense, not in a direct sense, but kind of in a, you know, in a more subtle sense, embodies that sense of the Latin American diaspora in the United States and migration and globalization, because everybody of all these cultures are basically excited to be part of the work, and they feel represented at the pyramids. And they were saying, oh my God, send me pictures. I mean, every single person who worked on it is proud to be part of the work, and that's part of kind of the economy of scale that is in my work embedded, in addition to just the general surface reading. And beyond the process, how do I ascribe meaning to the object? Because now the object is complete. So how do you then ascribe meaning? And I think that the gold dome really emanates from my broader practice of organic minimalism. And organic minimalism basically is a label that I developed to describe my own practice so that I could understand it for myself. And it's using reductive and streamlined objects and then giving them a lifelike quality, making them feel alive, so making them feel organic, making them feel like they're changing and mutating and embodying light, reflecting light. And I developed this vocabulary of organic forms, what I call humanized geometries, because I take like classic Euclidean, mathematical forms, like let's say this is a trapezoid. And instead of making a perfect trapezoid, I modify it by hand, I torque it, I change it, I make it feel humanized or imperfect as life is. Everything in life is imperfect, it's not perfect. And so it's like making it kind of more of a liquid organic shape. And most of my objects, the trademark in my practice is that I employ a fluid color spectrum. So like most of my works shift color and transform because that's part of life. Like we're in a constant state of change, transformation, fluidity that we can't control. And so my objects are basically meant to embody that state of fluctuation. So as you move around the sculptures, like there's one in downtown Cairo that Nadine put in one of the shows, and you could see how it shifts color and even form. So like the internal nucleus of the piece kind of disappears depending on the angle of viewing, and that's part of this whole concept of mutable objects, like making sculptures that change constantly. And where does this all come from? All these ideas, they germinated from my upbringing and my childhood in Puerto Rico, which is an island in the Caribbean, and it's part of the United States now. So this is kind of it's a funny meme that was going around the social media last week, and I feel like this is the story of my life. People say, oh, you don't look Puerto Rican. And then the answer is Puerto Ricans, and you have every shape, size, form, and color. And so yes, I am Puerto Rican. And even though I was born in Canada, my dad was Puerto Rican, and I was taken there as a baby, and so I grew up there, and that's basically all I knew. And Puerto Rico was a Spanish colony for 400 years, and then it became part of the United States in 1898. And so I always like to say that I'm like the daughter of a colony that refused to be colonized. And I love, what I love about Puerto Rico is the incredible architecture. Like, look at this, is like Spanish architecture that's like 400 years old. And the colors are so rich. And I didn't realize it until years after when I was making art, and I said, God, why do I gravitate so much to these colors? And then it took me a while to realize, well, they come from everything that I was absorbing as a child around me on the island. So colors, and then also, Puerto Rico has a very interesting heritage because it has a presence of Taino native culture that existed there before the Spanish arrived. And this is an example of a ceremonial park, which is probably 1,000 years old, that exists on the island. And I used to go there as a child, and I would study the rocks and the petroglyphs and look at the organic forms. And I was mesmerized by these monolithic rocks and how the fluidity of the native drawings. And so these are all things that I absorbed as a child. And another great thing about Puerto Rico is the geological formations on the island. These are called las cuevas de Camuy, and they're these caves that give you such a dramatic sense of geological time. Like when you're in there, you're looking out, you go, God, I mean, human life is so short because the earth is so old, and it gives you this sense of perspective that, you know, time, your life is kind of insignificant. And that's something that I felt in different locations around the world, the pyramids being one of them. Like when you're there, you get the sense of your life is really dwarfed. Like it's just a small little fraction of time, and you really have to make it meaningful because, you know, it runs out pretty quickly. And another wonderful thing about Puerto Rico is the rainforest. So this is El Yunque Rainforest, which the mountain is the tallest peak in the Caribbean, and it's shaped like an anvil. So it's called El Yunque because Yunque means anvil. And it's just brimming with biodiversity and animals and plants. And I spent a lot of time in my youth in the forests. And I had a very chaotic childhood. I lost my mother when I was 12. And you know, I had a lot of crazy stuff happening to me when I was growing up on the island, but I always would go back to nature to kind of calm down and be surrounded by nature. And that's kind of where that whole life force pulse comes from, my exposure to all of this. And here's El Luquillo Beach, which is one of the most beautiful beaches on the island. Behind it, you see the rainforest up in the mountain. And the Puerto Rico has this real sense of the earth, kind of like the sand merging with the sky. And another great thing that I experienced was oceans. And here is a phosphorescent bay called La Parguera. And it's one of those mysteries of life where you go into this water, it's glowing at night, and there's these microscopic creatures. And if you go into the water and you come out of the water, like your whole body is glowing. Like, it's really miraculous. Tiny little phosphorescent creatures. And here's an example, for example, of jellyfish. These are all the things that I saw growing up in the oceans, these kind of goobery little creatures that were glowing and changing. And the plants, this is a fantastic plant called morivivi, which means I lived and I died. And when you touch the plant, it basically snaps back at you and kind of bites your finger instantly. So you have another kind of wild mystery that exists on the island that is kind of inexplainable. And here's the coqui, which is a native little frog about the size of your thumbnail. Like, it's really tiny and it hides in all the plants, and it has never been able to live outside of Puerto Rico. And it sings this little coqui sound at night, and it's really another wonderful little mystery. And I grew up with lots of animals. Here I am around the age of 4 with my rooster, and I really had no fear. So I grabbed this rooster and roll around and put him in a crib, and, you know, like, I grew up with lots of exposure to kind of a wild childhood. And here I am at the age of 6. I kind of learned my artistic roots in my childhood because my mother was a painter. And so she and I painted multiple paintings, like hundreds of paintings over the years, oil on wood. And above me in this photo is a painting of cutting a sugarcane. So in Puerto Rico in the 70s and 80s, sugarcane was still like a really viable industry where you could drive on the side of the road and you could see miles and miles of sugarcane crops, and we would stop and we would look at the sugarcane people cutting, and we eat it, and, you know, and then we go back and we paint it. And we would use like knives and we would layer on the paint like in layers. And it's interesting how today even my practice is all about layers. And I didn't realize that as a child I was layering paint and layering meanings, you know. And my father, who's here on the, I guess it would be the left, was a doctor in chemistry, and here is 1971, he was the dean of natural sciences at University of Puerto Rico, and he taught me the love of science. He was kind of a crazy scientist, but he, God bless his heart, but he, I did learn a lot from him. My grandfather was a cartographer, and he taught me the love of looking at the earth from above. And both my grandmothers were involved in science too. Like my Puerto Rican grandmother was a pharmacist, one of the early pharmacists in Puerto Rico, and my other Canadian grandmother was a phlebotomist. And so from them, I learned the love of all of the microscopic aspects of the world. And then I went to University of Puerto Rico, Recinto de Rio Piedras, and I graduated, and then I moved to Los Angeles. Does that look like heaven or what? It's this huge metropolis, and I remember coming from an island and my first language being Spanish. I mean, I could speak a little English because they teach you in school, but I remember being overwhelmed because there was no center. You know, even though here you're seeing downtown, it felt completely spread out, and you could go miles and miles and miles, and you get lost in LA. There's no bearing. So I remember being a little bit disoriented the first few years until I realized, you know, like how to live there. But what was great about Los Angeles is the sense of constant movement, change, and transformation. So here you have these freeways snaking through the land that are constantly in movement, and people, they spend, I would say, like, God, it could be even 50% of their life on the freeway driving, you know, around and around, looping and movement. And there's something about the ethos of Los Angeles that's so generative to me. It is because it has this spirit of renewal. Like, you can go there and you can become anything you want, and you can kind of rebirth yourself, reimagine yourself. God knows I've done it. So it's really a great place to be an artist, because it has that sense of energy and the future, that anything is possible. And the wide open spaces in the West, a little bit outside of LA, the deserts create transcendence, and there's a real tendency to explore the purism of the sublime. Like, artists love looking for the sublime, for the metaphysical, for meaning. And also the sky has a presence, so you can feel geological time in a real sense, which gives you an awareness of human time. And you can also experience the feeling of silence. And that's a really, really special thing because we're so surrounded by light and noise all the time and sound that to be out in the middle of nowhere and just be completely in silence it's a really amazing experience. And the other great thing about Los Angeles it's the cradle of modern space-age technologies and architectures. So LA was kind of where all these cutting new age materials in the 60s and 70s, like resins and aerospace technologies, and all came to fruition and basically were provided to artists, and they grabbed onto them even though they were not normal art materials, and they would make new kinds of art with it. So that's a real generative thing that occurs in the West. And also the West also generated an original and authentic artistic movement called the Light and Space Movement, or West Coast Minimalism, in which the works that artists create focus on transcending the material, which is what we talked about in the very first slide, which is how do you take rudimentary materials and make them mystical or have meaning? And that occurs in the West. They basically create a perceptual experience. So it's not just about what you're looking at, but what you're feeling. And also, the West is the locus and home to seminal earthworks of land art that originated in the 60s and 70s. Here you see James Turrell's the Rodin crater, which is an abandoned volcano that he bought, and he converted it into a major earthwork. And inside the volcano, you basically look up to the sky, and it's all about experiencing a connection to the cosmological realm. And here's Michael Heiser's city, a magnificent use of hard-edged geometries that are in juxtaposition with the land. So a lot of these earthworks you're going to see are basically minimal, and they're kind of like geometric in nature. Here's Donald Judd's concrete boxes in Marfa, Texas, which are a fabulous example of geometric land art. And of course, Robert Smithson's spiral jetty, which is magnificent in Utah, and it curls out onto the peninsula, and it's just a great example of geometry and movement, which I love. And here are Nancy Holt's sun tunnels, which are classic Euclidean circular forms, and she places them on the land to have a conversation with the sun and the sky. And they kind of, at certain times of the year, the sun can poke through the several holes she's made, and you have these beautiful interactions. And finally, I'm going to put Richard Serra in there, even though he's not technically, I'm not a West Coast artist, but his works are just magnificent. I mean, these are these upright, linear planks that are located in Qatar. And there's 4 of them, and they're titled East-West. And they're very angular and rigid, but they're kind of like wondrous how they just stand there and defy gravity. So I'd like to think of my own practice as expanding on this prior land art history and contributing new meanings. So by using kind of this vocabulary of fluid organic forms that don't present any right angles, corners, lines, demarcations, basically adding a new lexicon to the land and basically being able to connect with the space that is in symbiotic relationship with the land. So basically these geometries stem from the natural world, and I want my sculptures to connect and reflect its surroundings. So here, this particular piece is a work that I did for Desert X Saudi Arabia 2020, in which it responded to the geological and cultural conditions of the site, because it was part of what Saudi Arabia is calling the 2030 vision, and the government is trying to diversify its economy and develop public service sectors such as education, infrastructure, and cultural capital. So the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was looking to the future, so this work was informed by that sense of bringing the future to that place on the earth, kind of breathing that energy of transformation and future. And here we're just going to play a short little bit, 1 minute clip so you can see the installation. Oh, what did it do? Did it go? Is it blank? Okay, yeah, it's blank. So the reason I use this monolithic form is because it speaks a primal language of ancient totemic shapes. And you can see the canyon, how magnificent is that? I mean, it was this 10,000-year-old canyon that most Westerners have never been there. And this form of this ancient totemic form is something that humans have gravitated to for eons, because they're like primal, like Stonehenge or obelisks, the pyramids themselves, Greek and Roman columns, like amulets or talismans that carry energy. Like when you hold on to one of these totemic forms, you feel this sense of energy. So that's why I really love this shape, and I kind of created this shape to speak this universal kind of semiotic language. So like semiotic languages, you can look at something and you don't need words to convey meaning. And the sculpture was in symbiotic conversation with its surroundings through a fluid color spectrum. So as you saw over here in this slide here, you see how the sun was activating it at sundown, and it becomes like this prism where it goes like a rainbow. And then later, here the sun setting in the sky, and the sculpture starts reflecting the mountains around it almost like a mirror. And so that transformative surface basically activated this ancient canyon, and it mutated and changed throughout the day. And then here you see it at night when there's no direct sunlight on it and it's dark, and we put artificial lighting on it, and it kind of became this purple, indigo, blue, mysterious, otherworldly object. So that's a fluctuating sculpture. Now, how do I translate all this symbiotic dialogue to Egypt? Basically, this project commanded the utmost respect and consideration for history, for the patrimony and the legacy of one of the world's most magnificent ancient civilizations. And nothing could compete with the pyramids or the Sphinx. It was like, no matter what you do, there's a primacy of these amazing architectures. And so I decided to do something like much more humble, lower on the ground, and responding to this archaeological and cultural history of the site. So it primarily was inspired by the amazing strides in knowledge achieved by the ancient Egyptians in the fields of astronomy, cosmology, science, art, architecture, mythology, and even sacred geometries, as we'll see. So we start with gold. Gold was an indestructible metal and a divine material. And so for them, it was so sacred, this material. And that's why my sculpture just had to be gold. And it's an exquisite material that has an incredible ability to reflect and refract sunlight. And so that was a real positive thing. And here you can see I worked for a long time in developing the perfect gold pigment that could run the gamut of like rich gold hues all the way from like a green gold to a yellow gold, all the way to a rose gold. And so this variable gold spectrum becomes activated as you move around the work and as the sunlight changes throughout the day and the position of the viewer. Voila. So this mutability really creates a symbiotic conversation with its environment. And another big aspect of my research was the power of the sun. The sun was vital in providing life force in ancient Egypt. And as we know, the form of the sculpture is inspired by Egyptians' reverence for the sun god Ra, the god of the sun and the creator of life. And its fluid, almost liquid form harnesses the energy of the sun by reflecting and refracting the light outward. And its golden ratio curvatures follow the depictions of the glowing orb above the sun god Ra's head. And if you look at this orb, it's never a perfect circle, which is what I really, really gravitated to. I said it's kind of an elliptical form, the way it's organic, and it feels like it's kind of like imperfectly perfect. Another major inspiration was the fascination for the metaphysical world that the ancient Egyptians gravitated to. They really believed in the afterlife, and they spent so much time studying the stars and the cosmological realm, and they actually produced very important astronomical texts, such as the Book of Nut And Roman Egypt produced the greatest astronomer of the era, Ptolemy, and his works on astronomy, including the Almagest, became the most influential books in the history of Western astronomy. Celestial happenings were crucial to ancient Egyptian culture and economy, and they would observe the stars to determine the flooding of the Nile, and the pyramids were even carefully aligned towards the pole star. So the dome is also inspired by the Eye of Nujat, Horus, the falcon-headed god of the sky, and follows the form embodied in the elliptical curvatures of the eyes of Horus and Ra, and acts as a contemporary oculus, or mind's eye aligning with a revered and mystical world beyond Earth. So this is what I call symbiotic land art, and when you look at it, it's even incorporating the world around it. So here you can see the reflections of the pyramids at sundown time in the side of the piece. So it starts bringing the outside world into it, not only reflecting it, but incorporating it. And, oh, it was a video, sorry. Anyway, it's just beautiful how it reflects the outside world. So this sense of universal geometries that we saw in ancient Egypt also stem from the world around us today, the present, the way, everything, the fabric of our universe. And let's just take a look. Let's start with the basic building block of the matter, which is the atom. The atomic particles, they harness energy and power in motion, and they even follow elliptical orbits. The cells inside our bodies present fluid, organic, imperfect curvatures containing life force. Even our DNA inside of us presents these beautiful, torquing, spiraling forms that are kind of universal. It's like pure fluid geometry in real life. And the mathematical golden ratio, or the Fibonacci sequence, manifests in beautiful curvatures in nature all around us. Like, look at this. You have an artichoke. You have a shell. You have a centipede. You have a sunflower. You have a fern, cactuses, even a storm. So all of these things follow this amazing elliptical mathematical curvature in real life. So that's sacred geometry to me. That's universal geometry. And macrocosmically, universal geometries are present way beyond Earth in the cosmological realm. Like, for example, really basic, the daily transformation of the sun into a dome at sunset, which is what the sculpture conveys. Monthly transformation of the moon into a dome at half crescent. The forces that permeate the universe, such as gravity, time, movement, change, and transformation, all occur following universal geometries. Like, let's look at the planets, how they orbit the sun. And here, even galaxies are spiraling in outer space, presenting massive examples of universal geometries in motion. My favorite is this Messier M32 galaxy, which presents a dramatic spiral elliptical form in action. And when we look back at Earth, I see how we are all connected through these universal geometries, both in ancient past, like in Egypt, and today, inside us and all around us. And by speaking a universal language that we all share and understand, I hope that my sculpture, Eternity Now, the gold elliptical dome, can act as a force of unity through the use of semiotic language, and that it becomes a symbol of universal force of common understanding between all of us, and that we can experience just being human together. And this is a timeless moment, and forever is now, so thank you. So I'd be happy to take questions. Preguntas. Yes.
I was fascinated by your description of how the work was created, and it led me to wonder a little about what happened after it was created. How did you get it here?
Oh.
Or tell us a little about the problem of getting it here, both logistical, financial, and whatever else may have happened. And how does all your answer to all of that relate to what is going to become of it after November 7th, when the exhibition comes to an end?
Well, I don't really talk about that, the original like shipping and all that, because that's like kind of like so boring and kind of logistical nightmares, but it's part, I guess it's part of the work. But I mean, you know, we basically got it created, and then it starts its long voyage on a ship. So we sent it by boat, and it was gone on the ocean for about 6 weeks. And I remember, like, I didn't sleep that well for those 6 weeks because I had heard these horror stories of like, oh, maybe there's like containers that fall off the side of the ship into the ocean and you can't do anything about it. Or every now and then, all the thousands of ships that are around the world actually sink. So until I got a call from Nadine saying, oh my God, the sculpture has arrived safely in the port of Alexandria, I was so nervous the whole time because after all that work, what if we lost it on the ocean? You know, I was like, this has to get there. So we went through that, but thank God it arrived safe. And then the amazing team of Lynn Logitrans that she took over, and they have like this amazing team here in Egypt that retrieved the sculpture, got it through customs, put it in storage for a few weeks, and drove it to the pyramids, and we did this whole installation, which actually I could have included in there. I mean, we have all this 2 forklifts that lift it at the same time and get it off onto the sand, and then the crate gets disassembled part by part by part, and there's all these little matching steel joints with letters marking which joint goes with which, and we uncrate the whole thing, and then unwrap it. I unwrap the baby, as I say, because I wrap it in this little white diaper cloth. So like the surface would stay nice and clean. And then we did like a thorough cleaning on it, and then we did the lighting to make sure at night it looks good. So it was this whole kind of logistical process, which I don't really talk about because I figure like that's not what you guys want to see, but I mean, I guess you want to hear about it.
The second part of my question was, how does that relate to what is going to become of it after November 7th? Where, when, and how?
Well, that's Nadine's going to talk about it, but not right now. There's a plan, but we don't want to jump the gun yet, but it's like in the works. So at some point we'll reveal where it's going. So who else? Somebody had a question back there?
Oh yes, thank you, Gisela. I was admiring your gorgeous work yesterday, and another admirer next to me told me a funny story, and I wanted to see if it was actually true, that the neighborhood dogs had found a way to burrow underneath the sculpture and make it their own as well, you know? They took shelter there. Is that true?
Yes. I mean, I've had so many, like, amazing experiences already in its natural habitat, just being here for like a few days. So like the dogs were digging, and then it was like a mom dog with a couple of puppies, and they dig a hole, and then we come in the morning and they have a whole cave under there. And we took them out just because it was opening day, but I told the security guard, look, if they dig another cave, just leave them there because, you know, they're not going to harm anybody. It'll just have like a hole in the sand. But I mean, that was incredible, the sense of having the animals even interacting. I mean, just being in the city with everybody. And after I installed, I also had a great experience with a group of girls who came, and they were all probably younger, like 12, they were like teenagers, and they all swarmed around me, and they wanted to just take pictures and like talk to me about the sculpture, and like I took a selfie with every single one of them. And it was just really rewarding because I was thinking, this is the kind of shift in culture that you don't, that this is what this is about. Not the rarefied art world of like the top collector people, but rather the people themselves, where you bring your art to create this symbiotic dialogue, and how the people of the location relate to the art, and it opens minds. Because all these young girls who were looking at it, they were looking at me like, and I said, you can be, who wants to be an artist? I said, and like a bunch of them raised their hand, and I said, all of you can be artists, you can be whatever you want to be. And the glow in their eyes, they just lit up, like, oh my God, you know, here's an example of a woman who's doing something that maybe they never dreamed they could do, that now maybe they get encouragement, you know, possibilities. Yes?
I had a question back there, but it was about the public, I mean, how you felt with but you just answered, so it's okay.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I have a small addition
Yes.
The workers, what was impressive was all the workers. We had 150 workers on site.
Yes.
The 10 days we had to install it.
Yeah.
I'm too tired. I'm usually quite loud. We only had 10 days to install most of the pieces. And as you can see here, the sand, there's a difference in the color. Because to preserve the site, we had to put plastic sheets and new sand, and then the installations. And for me, the highlight, and for the team that is here today, is the workers and how proud they were to take part of this project. And they were also taking selfies with the artists. Joao here had a lot of friends as well. And so the workers were really happy and taking selfies and
Yes.
talking to the artists. And I think this for us is what keeps us going.
Yes, and I want to add to that because we cleaned the sculpture the morning of the opening day, and Mito and a bunch of his team came, and all of us with buckets of water and rags, and we're like standing there on the ladder and cleaning, and it was so fun. Like that's what I enjoy doing, even though it was hot and we're all sweating, and like, you know, it was just like that team effort of doing something together as a community is really what makes these kinds of projects like this land art, you know, expansive land art meaningful, because you bring in communities as a whole that you otherwise wouldn't inside of a rarefied like gallery space. So it was really great. Thanks, Mito.
Gisela, can you talk about how you came to decide the precise position?
Oh, well, you know what, the artist, I don't think, well, as far as I know, didn't 100% select by themselves, but it was basically, because the site is so historic, Nadine, it's a UNESCO site, Nadine got the advisory committee, specifically Dr. Zahi Hawass, to walk around and select sites and make sure that nothing was being disturbed of the historic stones, so that's why each site was very thoughtfully selected for the works to make sure that that everything could then be removed perfectly and not disturb history. So in answer to your question, it was Dr. Zahi Hawass. So when they sent me my little pin, you know, they said, okay, here's your pin location, click on this link. And all of a sudden I clicked on the link and I was like, what? Like in front of the Sphinx, I was freaking out. And then I thought, oh my God, what am I going to create that's, you know, like humble and like something that really does it justice to the history. You know, it's really hard to do justice to this history because you can't kind of compete with it. You can only just be like a little added grain of sand in the history, you know?
So it was, well, predetermined,
Yeah, but it was predetermined, but you still, once you see your site, I mean, you have the freedom as an artist to think about what you want to do there, you know? But look, any of the locations are magnificent. Like I would have been happy with anything, you know, because you know, it's magnificent in any way. Anybody else?
Any more questions? All right, thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you, Gisela.